not to move it forward to the initiative stage. That was not an easy vote for me to make. I voted yes the first time because, as it should be, it was a vote for me, about democracy. It was a vote to allow people to make the decisions. They had voted in the community about whether or not recreational marijuana should be legal overall. What we were trying to do was to decide whether or not they should be allowed to vote on the commercial aspects. I voted the first time yes because I believed that it should go to the voters. I was strongly influenced and perhaps lost sight of what the real intent of the initiative was during the second reading. We had a number of people who came out and spoke very loudly about the negatives of marijuana. And there's a lot of nuances going on here. What I lost sight of in the second reading was that this was an initiative to remove a ban for something that was legal, and we were asking people to decide on the commercial element of it. And I lost sight of that aspect of democracy, I think. That sort of means that agreeing with people on the negative aspects of marijuana is a difficult thing to do. And it's even more difficult when I'm taking away people's right to vote. And so I'm literally caught between a rock and a hard place, and that's why for me that second vote was very difficult. Yeah. In retrospect, I should have stuck with a yes vote. I've talked to other counselors about their second vote, and they don't have the same dilemma that I have. And the dilemma that I struggle with is, did I interfere with the democratic process? Because of that nuance between it's already legal, and yes, the people of Grande voted against legalizing marijuana overall, but the council imposed the ban on itself unilaterally, and I'm pretty sure it did not have the right to remove that ban unilaterally. It had to put it back to the voters, at least on commercial activities. And I think that we should have allowed it to go back to the voters to vote. They were voting on two very different things. I think the first one was pros and cons of, and Measure 91, pros and cons of marijuana. Yeah. Overall. The second, the vote that we were discussing and the initiative that we were discussing should not have been about the pros and cons of marijuana. It should have been about whether or not people should decide on allowing commercial activities here in town. That was the decision. And yet the input that we received during the second reading was very much opposed to marijuana, period. Yeah. And that was difficult not to hear and respond to. Measure 91 passed by a majority within the state of Oregon, but there were a substantial number of small, low population counties that voted against it. Yeah. The legislature, in its infinite wisdom, decided that it would allow local governing bodies to decide whether or not to allow commercial activities in their communities. And so that was when they allowed councils to place moratoriums or bans on commercial developments. And I was not on the council at the time, but the council voted to place a moratorium or a ban on, and check the nuances of that, on commercial activities within the city limits. Measure 91 was about whether or not recreational marijuana should be legal. Or let's just put it this way. Should the use of marijuana be allowed outside of medical. That did not pass in LeGrande. Measure 91 applies to everyone. Because it was a state law and a state initiative, it applies to everyone and it cannot be reversed. Measure 91. What can be limited is commercial activity. You can't do anything about legal use. If your neighbor is sitting out on his back porch or her back porch and they're smoking marijuana and the smoke goes into your yard, there's nothing you can do about that. If you see somebody smoking in a public park, that's a different matter because that's part of the regulation of 91. If someone chooses to grow marijuana in their backyard, they have a right to do that for personal use. That's Measure 91. But somebody can't open a dispensary down the street, or somebody can't grow marijuana and then sell it. But my guess is, and I have no proof of this, that's happening. Because there is no dispensary here, and because that's part of the black market. After Measure 91 passed at the state level, some of the legislators realized that there were communities that didn't really want, the commercial aspect of marijuana. When the state legislature said, we're going to give you permission to do this, they also went back and created some additional restrictions about how to take it off. So in the context of allowing commercial activities for recreational marijuana, places like Huntington, when that first opportunity came up, I think this is what happened, is that they chose not to ban commercial activities. I believe that Sumter did likewise. They sort of watched what happened in Huntington, and then they decided, this would be a good source of revenue for our little community, and they chose to allow commercial activities. LeGrande chose not to. We have a moratorium on the number of medical dispensaries. We have 2. We're not going to allow any more. That's why at the June meeting, the people that were at that meeting speaking spoke to 91, whether or not marijuana should be legalized, because of the pros and cons. They spoke with heart and passion, and I will not deny that. But the issue before us in June was not the pros and cons of marijuana. It really, to me, was the pros and cons of allowing voters to make that decision. And some would say that the council should make that decision because it's more knowledgeable about the issue, and there's some merit to that. But I still think that voters should have had an opportunity to weigh in. And they weren't weighing in about the pros and cons, but that's what it would have boiled down to. On the 5-2, we decided the people who came and spoke in May spoke strongly towards the right of the voters to make that decision. When we came back in June, the majority of people who spoke negatively about marijuana. But others may have seen it as a pro and con thing now. That's a nuance as well. So what you're saying is democracy should be grassroots, should come from people. So in this case, there should have been an initiative from people sooner. The initiative to remove the ban should have come from the citizens, not from the council. And I think there's merit in that. And had that sort of perspective been more forcefully presented in May, I think the vote would have been different. And I think it would have given people more time. The problem with a 5-2 and then a 6-1 is that we shortened the time frame for a citizen group to put that initiative forward. We gave less time for democracy to unfold. And that was not my intent in the way I voted. There is the possibility that the council could have unilaterally just pulled the ban. But that wasn't going to happen. You just didn't have the vote for that. And I think what you would have had is you would have had a 6-1 or a 6-2 or a 5-2 vote against the council pulling that ban. And so that would have been, and then it would have put it back in the citizens' hands again. All roads lead to the citizens being allowed to decide whether or not commercial marijuana activity should be allowed within the city limits.